Howdy all you delicious people, I'm here today to view Zombieverse Season 1. So, how I want to approach this, or how I want to attack it, is I want to give you a non-spoiler version about the show. But how I'm going to do it is I'm going to be less and less vague about certain things as we go along. Going on and possibly talking about certain environments that the characters were in certain episodes, and the further and further we go, try and be more specific about the show. And then I want to go on and take a few minutes to kind of talk about me personally, because I had taken some time away from the channel. And then I'm going to go into going into full-on spoilers and go more in depth about the show and kind of talking about every episode and kind of how I felt about it. And so firstly, I have to go on and say that this show has a lot of potential. This show, especially in the first half of it, was really fun and really good, even though there were certain times where you would obviously complain about how like stupid the contestants might have been at certain points, how a lot of this show goes on to kind of feel like this kind of much more kind of like tag like show than like a zombie kind of show. But I really did like the first half of the show. And the only thing that I would probably have to complain about the first half of it is there's a lot of time taken up choosing who, of course, is going to do certain things. And like that becomes like a bulk of the show where it's just like, oh no, like you need to go on and you need to do that. Like, why do I need to go on? It like that's a lot of time wasted there. We then also have the second half of the show where there's a lot of times where I would complain about how convenient things start to get and how the show more and more starts to lose its supposed reality of the show. Because the show is supposed to sell you on its reality, but especially once we get towards further and further to the finale, the more it feels like the show is edited to get certain results. And I would also feel that there's certain characters that obviously get very annoying that they spend too much time on. And there are certain things that they take like a whole episode to do that you don't see them do anywhere later on in the show. So it's kind of like, okay, well, that was just a massive waste of time. We also have certain times where I would want to complain about when people are to supposedly get infected in the show. Because, of course, there are certain times where like we would have to forcibly say that one character is to be very infected, but again, it's a very slow turn process compared to certain other characters, or how all of a sudden other characters are to be quickly downed and dead and whatever. But then also certain characters would have this whole long stretch of shelf life that gets them almost to the very end of the show while still supposedly being infected. There is to also be this kind of back and forth thing about there possibly being a zombie cure and whatever, and they play around with that a little bit here. I would have liked there to have actually been some kind of vaccination or something like that, that it creates a whole episode to desperately go on and get to help out these certain characters. That would have been fun to kind of play around with. And so, even though it's so early in the days of this zombie apocalypse, still, there could have been a lot of fun things that you could have gone on and done with the show. So, with that said, kind of how I felt about the show. Like, so the first half, like, really once we get, like, to exit out of the grocery store, that's kind of where the show, like, starts to die off for me, and I start to lose interest. But yeah, but everything before that I was sold on. And once we get to, like, the amusement park, I'm like, okay, this could be really interesting, but they don't plan enough around with it. There were also certain times where they had gotten, like, survivors by the end of the show where I'm like, okay, you did nothing with that. Or, like, you had certain newer items that you used nothing with. It had so many things just start to become, like, throwaway things that just made me want to just kind of be either annoyed with or just not understand the time taken to do any number of those things. But overall, I would give this show a thumbs up. I would say that this show is, like, it's a good show. It's a good show. I'll give it that grading. And so, with that said, let's go on and let's talk about, like, some personal stuff of why I was gone, and then we'll get into, like, the full-on spoilers. So, I had taken some time away from the channel to focus on my physical well-being, taking time and doing some 30-day fitness challenges and being very focused on that, and going on and losing about roughly 15 pounds, and trying to just figure out a way to get myself in a better shape, and to also try and, like, experiment with certain other fitness things that I haven't even tried in the past, while going on and doing quite a bit of research on what better ways to be able to improve myself. And so while doing that, there was a lot of just hesitation about even coming back to doing reviews because I was so focused on that. There's a lot of times where I just wouldn't watch a movie or a TV show because there'd be often times where I'm just kind of like, why would I watch that? That has such poor quality. Or that, of course, is to be something that would be something of a show or movie that would give me no interest in watching because of how, like, the writer strike is going on and kind of giving us a lot of content that we have no interest in watching anymore. So with that said, yeah, so let's go on and let's go more in depth about each episode. So in the very first episode, we have a bunch of contestants that are to be on this kind of this love triangle, or this love show, where it seems that we have a bunch of people just sitting around on these couches, pining away that they could be these contestants on this love show. We all of a sudden have one of the contestants that seems to be sick, and I'm like, okay, this is during COVID. If you immediately have someone who's sick, it's like, okay, like, she's out, like, get somebody else in. Like, we don't want to get our other contestants sick. But they go on and they just kind of roll with it. So this girl is obviously sick, and they all of a sudden have this instant moment of the two of them kissing, and the kissing all of a sudden becomes that this girl is chewing into this guy. And that all of a sudden is like, oh my god, this is patient zero, this is crazy. And that all of a sudden starts to have everybody running around like crazy, going on into making their way through these streets and these back alleys. And, like, it was really creatively shot in the very first episode all this kind of running around, the possibilities of anybody getting attacked at any moment. This is wild. This is crazy. So we go into that, and then we get to this car that luckily is to conveniently have this driver, and it's like, okay, like a lot of this just kind of seems very realistic, and like I'll buy into this. And then we go on and we have this driver who's like, well, hey man, like I know that this is zombie apocalypse, but like I'm running out of gas. And so we all of a sudden start to have this director that also is in the car, who had, I guess, worked on the show, and I guess he is to showcase the sensitivity of zombies, how like certain sounds will go on and eventually make the zombies more alert to what's going on. But that kind of works for like the very beginning of this, but then I start to feel more and more that like even the the more quiet people get, it doesn't matter. The more and more it's just like the zombies just attack the person anyways, so you kind of just throw that out the window of like no matter how quiet a person can be, it doesn't matter. So we go on to then realize, and the biggest problem that I also have is like when Jonathan or John, Jonathan goes on to have the whole like blood thing, and he's running around in the second half, and he's to have like a timer that he doesn't even know about. That kind of thing annoyed the crap out of me, to just be like, okay, like we're not told like how, or Jonathan isn't told how long he has, how quickly he should be doing any of this, and then like he just has like, so yeah, that's the one part of the game that kind of really annoyed me. But I guess that also gives the reality aspect to the show, but still. But let's kind of backpedal because I haven't gotten to the grocery store yet. So we get this driver to get them to this gas station, and I'm like, okay, this gas station is way too quiet, and I'm like, okay, like this seems too suspicious. Like it doesn't even look like anybody's in the gas station. And so I'm like, okay, like this tells me that something's going to happen. Something's going to happen here. Like it's not just going to be, it's not going to be like, okay, they're going to be able to pump their gas and then leave and then go on to the next thing. So this tells me that this is going to be the next level or the next mission or the next whatever. So what happens is we, of course, have the driver who puts his keys in his pocket and then goes on to pump gas. And I'm like, dude, if I were to have been the person in the car, I would have just been like, no. Like, hey, man, like, we don't know what's going on right now. Like, you leave the keys in the car and, like, whatever happens, like, we're going to get out of here. Because if what they could have done is like somebody could have jumped in the front seat and said, hey man, like if anything happens to you, like you can kind of open this door, run in the van, and you'll be safe, and then we can drive off. But instead we have the driver make his way out to start pumping gas, and of course he's making a bunch of noise while putting his card in and so on and so forth. So you could have also just paid inside. Because we start to get some kind of complaining about certain characters, about how they are hungry, And I'm like, well, yeah, like, shouldn't you guys have gone quickly into this gas station to try and uh, like scavenge for food? And it seems like they try to do that, but then they quickly fail at it. So, or it seems like so many people just start kind of running around and doing so many things. And like once we get to the gas station, there's certain things that people are doing that they can't do any other time, it seems. Like we start to get the one uh, guy who's wearing the hat, who is to be Hung Chul, Hung Chul, and the guy that is wearing the goggles and the hat in the beginning of this, he or No Hung Chul, I'm assuming that's how his name could be pronounced. He goes on, and at some point we have Din Din pumping the gas as No Hung Chul is kind of doing some distraction things to get the zombies to go in some other direction, because the gas that was pumped by the driver, it ends up that the driver ends up getting attacked, and then he ends up turning into a zombie, and they have to kind of put the gas back into the car, and they have to do this whole thing over again. So, and there's a lot of times where people like needlessly die in the show, or there's certain times where people just don't get saved, which annoy the crap out of me because I want to make sure that everyone gets saved. So we go on to have the driver is down. He goes crashing through this windshield of this car. So now not only do they have to pump the gas and use this kind of credit card thing, but then they also have to get the keys from the driver to get out of this location. Even though they go on and find another car that works just fine and they could have drove off from that. No, they only want to get this one car. So hence the problem of these people not like doing a lot of scavenging. They just stay in the car and they don't do anything else. The biggest problem that I have with this show is people don't go out and survey the lands enough, and they don't come back with anything, and that's the most annoying thing. Like we even have Lee Soo Young and the Tsuki, the young girl, like they run out, but then they run out to this kind of like small like location and they get stuck there, and I'm like that was a giant waste of time. And they run from out there to just running back because like eventually everybody just starts to get out of the car for whatever goofy reason, and a lot of them don't like make much progress, and we end up getting a specialty zombie in this gas station, which I was like, okay, this is really cool because this specialty zombie runs really fast, and I was like, okay, this seems really cool. When are we going to be able to use more of this? And it seems like they never do. And like the further and further we go into the show, I'm like, okay, like we lose the whole kind of like, oh, this is a unique zombie. Like, it would be kind of cool if we had like a parkour zombie, or like if anybody is to have gone on and kind of watched kind of gameplay of like Left 4 Dead or a number of those kind of other kind of specialty zombie kind of things, is like, well, like why didn't we get anything of that? The later and later the show got. I would have loved to have seen like a sumo zombie or like a strongman zombie. Like that would have been fun, but we got none of that in this show. But anyways, we go on and we have everybody eventually just kind of start to run around, and then at some point we even get like the injured girl to like go from one part of the car to now having to run back into the car. And so the more and more we're just kind of like, okay, these people are running around with chickens with their heads cut off. None of this makes sense. But eventually, all of them get back in the car. It seems that all of them are fine. So they make their way to this grocery store. And here, of course, is where we start to like have things like really like be interesting about the show. So we have our characters going into this parking lot, and they're in a pretty good distance from like the opening of the store. I'm like, why wouldn't they have gone on to like put their car like right in front of the store, like any normal like zombie movie would go on and do, to kind of blockade the opening of this store? But again, this is not a real reality show. It's not. There's the biggest problem I have with this show is the lack of strategy in it. Because evidently none of these people feel to me to be kind of like strategy characters when it comes down to a zombie apocalypse. Nobody has really thought this through. They're just kind of doing whatever, and it's like, okay, we have to do all of this crap for no justifiable reason. So we make our way to the grocery store, and we of course start to realize that the doors are to start to open and close and whatever, and so we have to make sure that they can be closed and locked and whatever. So finally, when our characters start to get into the grocery store that looks empty, but eventually the further and further we go into the show, or the grocery store in the store, we start to realize that, okay, like here's this butcher guy, here's this kind of microphone character, so on, so forth. So, and eventually zombies start to come at a certain point. So, eventually what happens is they go into this this grocery store, and eventually they find survivors in this room that has all these lockers. It's basically like an employee lunchroom, and so it's like, okay, here's a lot of survivors. This is great. This is cool. But once you get a lot of survivors in a zombie apocalypse thing, here a big problem is like, okay, like we have to come up with a big vehicle for all of these people, and we always have to worry about who's going to get infected and so on and so forth. So a lot of times it's great to have a lot of people in a zombie apocalypse environment, but then again, it's also great to not have anyone by your side and just be by yourself, which we don't have anyone do. We don't have anybody really run off by themselves, and or if they do, we'll find out that, oh, they just got infected or whatever. Like we don't have a lot of characters that last very long once they're by themselves. So we go in, and so we have this lunch area. Everybody's going on and introducing themselves, telling us who they are, if they're a doctor or a soldier or an athlete or this or that. And immediately I'm like, okay, like this Dex character. Immediately in the second half, Dex, the kind of the military guy, he's the most interesting thing about this second half. And everybody else is just kind of there. And like that's the sad thing of like we have like possibly such a variety of certain characters that have certain skills that are kind of convenient for the show. But then also we have certain characters like Dex who should have been used a lot better on the show, but he wasn't. So it just kind of got me a little frustrated. So eventually what plays out hours later, it seems, is we have these characters, because the reason why I say hours later is because we have so many people who are introducing themselves and going on and kind of figuring out who should go out to start getting food and drink and all that stuff. And we end up getting like the the athlete like characters, the guys with the leather jackets. So like, yeah, get the athletic guys to go out there first. And so they go out there and they grab this box and they try to grab all of this crap that a lot of people are desperately asking for. And a lot of people are asking for the same things. Hey, can you give me this purple candy that I've been wanting? I'm like, dude, you should be rationing for the things that are the closest to where you are at. Like, immediately, if you're looking out the window of where you are, like, you should be looking at, like, okay, hey, right by this door, there's some water there, and there's some food there. So, if you guys just grab all of that, bring it up here, boom, like, that's gonna, like, save us for the entire night. But again, like, we have to make this like an obstacle course like thing. So what happens is we have to get these bags that are on like the opposite end of the store, because evidently the store doesn't have like paper bags or plastic bags or anything like that rationally in any grocery store that would be available. Or we end up having all these shopping carts that nobody really uses, which is again the dumbest thing. Immediately I was looking at all of the shopping carts. I'm like, why not use any of the shopping carts to get any of these items, which they technically tried to do, but then did it in the worst way. So, biggest complaint. So, we go on to have these athletic guys get this box, which they end up basically like they take the box and are dragging the box around. And immediately when they decide that they want to pick up the box, everything falls out of the box and the box completely breaks. And so now they're like, oh my god, what should we do? And that's when the zombies conveniently come in and start to surround the grocery store. Which I was still like, okay, sold on this show. Yeah, this feels good. Yeah, just pop that off. So what happens is the guys are just running around like chickens with their head cut off all around the store to just get killed. They get nibbled on. They get chewed out, and they're dead. They die. So now we have to go on and realize that now there's zombies all over the store, and there's more zombies because the two athlete guys died. And so now we have to pick other people to go out there. We end up having, for the most part, both the guy with the hat and goggles, Hong Chul, and Dex go out there. And those are the two that kind of go on and get the most stuff. They end up getting the bags from the opposite end of the store, while also like trying to get certain items like water. Here's the thing: I want to give props to Hong Chu. We have him go on to like toss these water bottles, which I was like, oh my god, this is freaking brilliant. This is strategy. Dex really just kind of has this kind of like stick with him, and at certain points he's kind of like this World War Z character who was Brad Pitt, where he's like, hey, we'll put these kind of rolls of paper on our arms, and I'm gonna go on and have this kind of this paper or this paper this kind of towel like thing, and if any of the zombies try to attack us, I'll put the towel in. Like, so this guy is trying to be like Brad Pitt from World War Z, basically. So which he does this in the beginning, but in like the rest of the show, like, forget about all of that, right? So like this guy tries to be like Brad Pitt from World War Z. So for the most part, we have Dex and Hong Chu go out there, Chul, and like they start to get things, but then not enough. So we then go on and have the mistake of sending two other people out there, and then we have Jonathan and the most annoying character, the character that's injured throughout the show, go out there in this cart, and that basically just turns into a massive waste of time. And it begins that all these characters have to go out and rescue the one character that's in this cart thing, where we have one card that's stacked on top of another, and really, like that whole thing of Jonathan and the Nana or Nanar, whatever her name was, the injured girl. That's how I'm going to explain her what her name is throughout this whole entire thing. They go out there and they waste time by doing nothing. Then we go on and have this girl in the cart have to get rescued by all the other characters. So now we have so many characters just kind of wildly going out there, and we end up getting He Kwan that ends up getting killed in the process because he's taking this bucket and he's smacking it around. So all the zombies are surrounding him and eventually kill him in this swarm of thing, because evidently He Kwan was either a character that was supposed to die in this beginning because, again, you question the reality of it, or you also have to feel that, like, okay, this does make sense that eventually somebody's going to get cornered, but like, I would just want to say that, like, I feel there's always like a workaround for everything. But again, uh so rest in peace, He Kwan. They do a whole moment of silence, and I thought, like, setting that up was great. I enjoyed it. Plus, throughout this whole entire show, I really loved the doctor character. Um, Hung Woo, really liked that character. Thoroughly enjoyed him. He was fun. So we go on to then have all the characters come back, and uh, at, so they kind of get food all in this one really just backpack at some point. They just have this backpack full of food that they consistently have to keep opening to show it's like, hey, we still have things. Who knows how many times that whoever in the show probably just refilled that backpack with stuff during whatever breaks that they were on, or whatever kind of, because there was obviously certain times where this show was stopped to shoot these things, because obviously with the way that the show was edited and the way the show was changed during the show, obviously, yeah, it kind of it just kind of ruins things for me at certain points. So after they go on and they get the food, I'm thinking like, okay, sweet. Like, this could be a point where these people could be like, okay, hey guys, this is really late at night. Let's go on and let's just kind of sleep here for the night and just kind of call it a day. No, these people just keep on going. Where I'm like, man, like, when was this show like shot? Because I'm thinking like, did these people ever sleep in this show? Because it didn't feel that way. It felt like these people just kind of for days just were up during odd times of the day, probably to have like the lesser of people kind of out in the streets being able to ruin the shots of the show. So we then go on and go from needing to be in this grocery store to then realizing that they have to figure out an exit out of this grocery store. And so we have a ton of people that go on and decide, for the most point, to go into the back room of this grocery store, the stock room of the back of the store, to exit that way. Or there's certain people that decide to like go, I think, from like the front door. But anyways, it just becomes really goofy. So moving on. So we have eventually them all escape. It seems that none of them are infected at this point. They run all the way to supposedly this safe area, this kind of tented area, that eventually leads them to this parking lot full of all of these cars, which I'm like, okay, this sounds still very like a rational scenario. I can buy into this. So eventually they have to go on and find seemingly this one and only vehicle for them to escape this area. Because if not like before with the whole gas station where there was like two cars where like one of the characters just kind of grabbed and ran off with, which once we get to the kind of like the whole truck of supplies, like why not just go into the truck of supplies and drive off with that? Ditch the car that you've already been driving hours with and leave. Again, where was the gas station stops from that whole car drive journey? Makes no sense. So we get into this parking lot, and so now it becomes that we have to find the right key for the right car, and this is kind of fun and exciting. We start to get all these zombies that appear. We also, in the grocery store, had this couple who left early on to just F off, and just we find them later that they're to be these kind of uh, these rice sellers, or these popcorn rice sellers, whatever goofy food thing that they go on to sell. And so we run around into this parking lot, and the best, or the fun thing was these people starting to get up on top of these cars while these zombies were starting to surround certain cars. I'm like, this is awesome. I love this. This actually feels like a strategy being put together. So we start to see more and more that these characters are starting to jump on top of these cars to try and get these zombies to run off. So eventually we have, I think, either Lee Young or we have Din Din, who goes to find the one convenient car that has all this like tarps and all these things to kind of cover this car. They find, okay, hey, this is the one key that works, because they evidently couldn't find a key for the one bus that actually would have been the best like strategic car to have during a zombie apocalypse. Because hey, if anything goes wrong, like there's a certain number of ways you can exit from a bus, and I think a bus is a way better way of getting around. As far as if a zombie goes into the bus and whatever, so it's probably not a convenient way to travel, but still, it is what it is. In my brain, I'm thinking, why not get to the bus? The bus is the best one. But nobody probably is to be able to drive the bus either. But again, moving on. So we have our characters start to kind of run back and forth, and it gets really annoying. And eventually, once Dex starts to kind of run out there, it's like, okay, man, this guy's really fast, and like I can understand how like this character is going to be a key character throughout this whole entire series. So what happens is they find the key car, but the car has to go on and get to a certain part of this parking lot. So they realize that they have to move certain cars to get to that one, and so we have to bring in a forklift, and we conveniently have certain characters who have forklift experience. So convenient, right? So we have these two characters that are having this forklift, and they're driving it, and I'm like, man, this is going so slow. As well as also we have all the zombies who are trying to get at the characters that are now holding all these carts in front of this one area to kind of use as a blockade, while the two people are operating this forklift, and I'm just like, okay, how is this going to go south? So, and of course it does. We have the doctor who is kind of this outlook guy who is kind of directing everybody or guiding everybody where to go. And I was like, and he's on these wooden pallets or these kind of plastic pallets, and I was like, all right, this is awesome. So what happens is the characters that are on the forklift, eventually the zombies start to swarm them, and once one of the characters, who of course is Hong Chu, who basically is the most cowardice character of this whole entire series, in all honesty. But I really liked the character. I thought he was funny, and like I liked him more so than a lot of the other characters. Even though Dex is probably my favorite because he's the most athletic. So like Hong Chu is like my second best character, and I liked when they were teamed up together in the beginning. It was good. It was fun. Din Din was good at like the pilot, like the first episode. Then anything after that, he kind of got just lost in the shuffle, and who cares? So, in all honesty, sadly enough, so we have Hong Chu that runs off and leaves the woman, the injured woman, to basically get infected. The doctor runs out trying to help out, and he, of course, gets infected also in the process. He gets nibbled on his arm and whatever. So we now have two characters that are infected. I'm like, okay, so later days, zombie people, because I am not going to go on and help them out. How quickly are they going to turn? But no, we start to realize that there are certain times where like, oh, well, they're infected, but we're going to still keep them on our team, or like we're going to ditch certain characters because we can't trust them. And so it kind of becomes like, well, okay, like why is it that you'll be willing to work with these people but not certain others? So it's not like the same thing consistently throughout the show. So once the doctor and the injured girl get infected, here's where it all of a sudden plays into the huge convenience of the show. That these characters got infected, because now the infected characters can do this forklift operation and be able to move this car, and then the rest of the characters can go on and try to run to the one car that, of course, they can get into, and they try to use the car to try to backpedal out of the parking lot. But then eventually the doctor needs to guide them throughout the whole entire parking lot, as we realize that Din Din just sucks at driving. Obviously. So, these zombie characters, or the as they call them, zombie characters, but they're not really zombie, they're infected characters. The infected characters come into play during this whole entire mission. I'm like, that's kind of convenient. So they get out of the parking lot, they drive off, and they're driving for frickin' ever. And I'm like, okay, here's when the show really starts to slow down. So they're driving all forever, and like these people haven't slept seemingly in days now, and they haven't eaten anything. And then we have the backpack that plays into like, okay, hey everybody, like take from this backpack. Luckily, one of our characters decided to keep this backpack throughout this whole entire mission. So, and it seems like most of the stuff that they're eating is all like candy and stuff that you probably shouldn't eat, but you're eating it anyways. So we have them driving along, and the whole entire time they're talking about the zombie infected characters. They're talking about like, well, hey, like, do you think that we should still have them here? Like, do you think that they're safe? And like they're bickering back and forth, and a lot of the times the girl who is injured is consistently just blah, 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 at the mouth, and immediately starts to become an annoying character. So they're bickering back and forth about what to call the characters, which really you should just call them infected, if anything. So, but again, like people don't like titles or whatever, like because I kept calling them zombies because they kept calling them zombies in the show. So eventually, we have this whole bickering back and forth thing, and this leads them to eventually make their way to this truck that all of a sudden has all of this supplies, has all of these clothes, has all this food and everything. Which I'm like, okay, great. Immediately, you should just switch cars and go into this truck and leave with it. But what happens is they take both vehicles. So I'm like, okay, where are you going with all of this stuff? Turns out, mood point. So they take this vehicle, and like they also were consistently talking about stealing the Rolex and the purse from the woman that had all these kind of like fancy rich items, and they were kind of pushing the car out of the way because there was an accident that happened here and whatever. And so eventually they get the accident moved, they drive off with the car. So they end up on this bridge where we all of a sudden have these people that are kind of stopping the vehicles. So the whole thing here is whether or not they can get into this town or not. And it seems that this town doesn't really have much infected, and so it's like, hey, this seems great. So they're now passing off the infected people as if they're normal, but if anything, it just looks not well put together because they're putting makeup on the characters, and it obviously looks like they're putting on makeup, and it looks horrible. So, uh, to just try to pass them off to try and get in this town. So this takes them forever to talk amongst these people to get into this town. And the further and further we get into this town, the more shady it seems. So I'm like, okay, everything has to just be this weird, goofy, off put thing. So we have this town leader who is guiding these new people into his town, and we have all of a sudden them making this kind of weird meat, and then eventually it leads them to this area where they can go on and eat all this food. And we have this woman who's at this funeral because of a loss of a loved one. She's just doing this forever, and I'm like, okay, well, this makes sense that you have this funeral and this woman is crying. But then again, how long is it going to be before this zombie guy comes out of this room? And here we go. So we have all these characters going into this this place to eat, and they're eating food like nobody's business. And I get it because it makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of food there, but if I were to be this people in this town, I'm like, hey man, like the food doesn't grow on trees, like quickly. So you would have thought at some point these people would have been like, hey man, you're eating a lot of our food. Like, we definitely want to kind of serve you people with this. Seems like a bit of excess. So we have our characters talking, and what eventually happens is, by the time that they finally decide to all go into this place to rest, they're again worried about the infected people. And so, bizarrely, they decide to put the infected people in a separate room, which actually works out conveniently for what the next mission is, which ticked me off. So, cause I'm like, this was done in a specific way to work for what was going on next for the show. Like, this is not reality. This is bullshit. This is some bullshit. So, kind of takes me off at that point. So, what happens is we bizarrely in the middle of the night we have two characters that end up getting grabbed and are to be sacrificed to like the the town leader's mother because she's a zombie. So we find out that ends up being Patricia, and that ends up being Hung Chul, the guy with the hat and the goggles, and consistently the guy who's willing to sacrifice anybody to get further along in the show. So we have these two missions going on simultaneously. So what happens is for the Patricia and the Hong Chul mission, what happens is they end up like being woken up, tied to this rope, and in front of them is the zombie mother. So they end up having to figure out a way to untie themselves from this rope, and then they go on and try to figure out a way to escape from this room through this window. And they of course end up having to put this whole like kind of thing on top of the mother so they can't bite or be scratched. That's the one thing that immediately gets forgotten right after kind of like the early parts of the show, is for a zombie to be able to scratch you and infect you that way. Eventually, we have characters who are wearing gloves and all kinds of clothing and whatever. So eventually, we have to just kind of play that off as like, oh no 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 no, like that's like how they won't get infected. But I'm like, yeah, but like we had Dex who was kind of wearing that like kind of baseball equipment that all of a sudden gets lost and he no longer has throughout the rest of the show. We could have really had these characters legitimately eventually starting to get more like protection throughout the rest of the show, so there would be less of a chance for them to get infected. Like eventually there are certain zombie apocalypse movies or shows where we start to find that our characters get into like sporting goods like stores, and they end up getting like all kinds of like armor and all kinds of things, so that way they have less of a chance of getting infected. But again, I guess that's one thing that this show did not think of. But yeah, but I think that would have been one cool thing if they would have had at some point like our characters going to a sports store to eventually put on all of this gear and get protected, because this is now a zombie apocalypse. But the equipment probably purchased would be way too expensive, and this show was probably trying to shave as much money as they possibly could. So we'll give them that. So we have our characters who are all tied together via their feet in this room. Again, all of these people must be the soundest of sleepers to have been able to have their feet being tied and all kinds of things. And we would have to assume maybe they were drugged. Who knows? But then again, maybe they haven't been sleeping for a number of days, so they might have just passed out via this thing and slept just so well. So we have the infected characters now needing to guide the other characters in another room of where to go, because luckily they found some other room that had all these cameras. Convenient. So the infected characters tell the other characters how to get out of the room, and they end up bashing their way through this door, and they end up getting out of this area, which leads them to run out to a location that is to be this kind of factory-like thing. So we have the contestants, and they make their way eventually to this kind of factory or facility. So what happens is they run into this factory, and at some point they are to try to hide from the bad guys, the people in the town, because we find that there is a bunch of zombies that are just kind of tied to all of these things in this factory. So we get a little side story from the bad guy in this room, and then eventually they start hearing some of the kind of hard-hatted contestants, and they're all wearing GoPros on the top of their hard hats. So I'm like, oh, okay. So this is a scripted part where they had to put all these hard hats on. So if there is any kind of limited camera angles that they couldn't get into this factory, you have the GoPro that you can see everything. The cameras that are on top of their heads. Because what they were having on their heads was not a light, it was basically a GoPro thing, a camera, so you can shoot a lot more. So what happens is eventually, when all the characters start to do the hide and seek thing, we have one of the people in the town find the young girl and put her in her cage. I'm like, okay, so this is the next mission. So the mission is to rescue the girl in the cage, and so eventually, after everybody's trying to figure out what the heck to do, taking a million hours to do that, Jonathan decides that he's going to fill himself with blood and zombie juice to rescue the girl. So we find out that there's a time limit on how long Jonathan could be having this blood. Then why wouldn't he just douse himself consistently with this blood or zombie juice? He could have taken... What they could have done is they could have taken that bucket with them and just kept dousing themselves with the blood and juice. That's just me. Strategy, again, points go to this guy. So we have Jonathan, who makes his way to trying to get to this girl, and all that he has enough time to do is toss her the key and then run back to try and avoid getting mauled by all these zombies, which of course he gets heavily infected, to the point of him turning way quicker than any of the other infected people in this show. It seems. And so, because he gets horribly bitten, so on, so forth. So, because they tried to use this little motorized truck, but that goes nowhere, and eventually the truck just kind of gets kicked, and that mission was kind of a waste anyways, because how is that truck going to get to the girl in the cage that was way up high? Makes no sense to me. So, but hey, at least somebody was freaking coming up with some kind of strategy. It kind of felt like the Dawn of the Dead movie, where they used the dog to try to get to that guy in the other gunsmith building, or that gun building, the gun store building. Let's say that. So after Jonathan gets heavily infected, but still has somehow the ability to make his way back to get to the rest of the group, the realization is like, well, hey, even if this girl still has this key, she still has to escape somehow. How is that going to work? So we then realize, conveniently, in this factory, there is this kind of pulley system. So what happens is the girl runs to this rope. Dex, finally the guy that is to be like the most athletic character, is actually again being actively used here. So what happens is he decides he's going to sacrifice himself jumping onto the rope. And so the girl ends up getting saved. Dex is to possibly get sacrificed. Conveniently, we have all of a sudden, while this is going on, the people in the town coming back in like, hey, like, what are you guys doing here? And I'm like, how convenient is that? But everything has to be convenient anyways. So we again have all of a sudden where certain characters are getting. So we have the rope situation where the girl gets saved. Dex climbs back onto this rope, and it's like, oh my god, wow! Like Dex, you saved that girl, and also you climbed up that rope. Wow, we're impressed. So now they have to figure out how to leave this area, and that's when the townspeople come in. They grab the infected characters, and so I would have just been like, okay, well, I'm getting out of here. I'm leaving. I'm gonna take an exit. I'm gonna get out of here because those people are infected anyways. Take them. Goodbye. So, but again, like everybody wants to be like, hey, we're gonna save all these people, be held accountable. We all of a sudden have this truck that just rams through this wall of boxes, and we all of a sudden have this reporter that's in this truck. And here is where the show just gets slower and slower, and I'm just like, what is the point of this part of the show? This ends up being the worst part of the show, in all honesty. So, the truck guy rams through the truck. Everybody realizes, hey, let's get onto this vehicle. Let's get out of here. And we end up finding out that the townsman ends up having a bite on his arm from his own mother. And he ends up eventually getting turned into a zombie, but who cares? Moving on. We then find out that this guy was trying to do a report on this guy who owned this factory, and really any of the information that kind of comes to play into this whole reporter thing immediately gets lost by me. I'm like, this is boring. I could care less. So here's the biggest problem that I have with the show. So we have this reporter who has this entire wall of guns. He has these shotguns, these pistols, all of these things. But the only weapon of choice that he wants to use against these zombies are these potato guns. And I'm confused. None of this seems very logical to me, but hey, this has to be a reality show, and this was stupid. You could even have had like paintball guns, and like it would have made a lot more sense than potato guns, but again, that's just me. So that kind of simulated some kind of blood or something. I would have been more impressed by that. So we go to this reporter's place, and we start to find out that he's kind of saving zombies and putting harmonicas on their mouth. And we start to realize that Jonathan is going to turn soon, so he gets a harmonica in his mouth, and he starts to... The most annoying thing of the show was the harmonica part. And so we come to find out that this reporter, for this whole week of infection, has been learning how to UFC, MMA, fight against these zombies because he's had all the time in the world to just do all of this stuff. Even though it doesn't make sense, he can just do all of it. So we find out that this reporter is to take all these zombies and to practice on how to prevent himself from being attacked by them. And so he opens this up to all the other contestants to force them into these caged rooms to fight against these zombies. So what this guy goes on and does, which I want to call like him almost doing like a German suplex on these certain zombies, which he doesn't technically do a German suplex, but it kind of is the same maneuver. So what happens is this guy, this reporter, is going up against a zombie, and he quickly just gets behind the zombie, and then he goes on to grab the zombie by the waist from behind. And so this would almost be like a kind of a German suplex kind of maneuver if you know pro wrestling, or amateur wrestling. And so we have this guy who's kind of having these hands in front of the zombie to kind of control where he's going, almost in like a reverse bear hug situation. So we start to get to where our characters now, our contestants, have to try to do the same reverse bear hug German suplex almost maneuver to eventually have this nowhere to be used in the rest of the show. Giant waste of time, this is. There is never one bit of any kind of wrestling down a zombie anywhere in the rest of the show because that whole thing was unlogical to even attempt at any point of the show. But we have certain times where supposedly characters are to try and wrestle down these zombies. I'm like, dude, like at any point, these people would get freaking chomped on and infected, and this makes no sense to me. We have Dex go in there, and Dex just kind of like freaking like drop kicks and all kinds of things, all these zombies, and he's way quicker than any of the zombies. And I was like, man, this is awesome. No, wait, he like drop kicks them later on in the show, like during the finale, but he does a lot of cool running around, and he also like runs up this thing and completely avoids all these zombies. And then eventually when one of the zombies gets really ticked, it just kind of just takes him out. So we go on to then have the whole like potato gun thing where they're practicing on how to do potato guns. And I'm like, I would just love to fast forward through all of this because I'm assuming any of it is going to be a waste of time to even see them do, which pretty much was. So, getting past that, it seems that we find that uh, that Lee Young is probably the best shooter out of all these characters, and that's going to play into like, well, she's obviously going to have to do the one mission that's going to have her use this weapon later on. Whatever. So we eventually start to have our characters realize that they need to leave this area. That Jonathan is still very much infected to the point of him, like the following night after they've been drinking and having a good laugh. We start to realize that they have to leave at some point, but Jonathan is so zombified now that they're backing and forthing whether or not they should still take Jonathan. And I'm like, he's full on infected. Does this make any sense? I can see how possibly anybody would look at characters from like The Walking Dead, like Michonne, and just be like, well, hey, if you could like have a zombie with you, then I kind of have them like kind of be carried around and whatever. Then like you won't have any zombies come at you and attack you, or you can use kind of like the zombie as like a human shield, and there could be scenarios that could kind of work strategically in your favor. But so they're back and forthing about whether or not to keep uh, Jonathan on the team, but they leave him instead. We also have Patricia that ends up asking for Jonathan's credit card number, which I thought was hilarious. So we leave this area to go on to eventually make their way uh, to the amusement park, because eventually the reporter goes on to state that there is to be the signal of this boat that can leave them to safety. And so it's like, okay, you guys have to go to this certain location. And so it's like, okay, this that's great. So they all leave, and we still have the two infected characters with the rest of the group, because of course these characters are going to kind of play into the show fairly well. So we make we make our way to this amusement park, and so what ends up happening is that once these characters decide to turn on the power for this amusement park, all of a sudden it starts attracting all these zombies. I'm like, this is basically just Zombieland, the same thing. It's like the same thing. Most of the show just copies and pastes from Zombieland, the first movie, and I'm kind of ticked off about that. But then also I can just be like, no, like, hey, this is fun. You got some cool environments to play with this kind of thing, and it's a really fun show. But it's basically just Zombieland. It really just copies and pastes everything from that. Even to the point of having like one random like clown zombie. I'm like, so copy and paste basically. So we have the amusement park. We start to see all of the zombies, even the ones from the grocery store, now at this amusement park. I'm like, how? How would the zombies made their way all the way from the grocery store to this amusement park? How much of a drive was that? Again, convenience, or convenient to how limited number of zombies were really for the show. So we come to find out that at this amusement park, that all of a sudden you start to see these screaming people that all need these people's help. There is to be one girl in this kind of merry-go-round, kind of horse thing that she's stuck with all these zombies around her, and she's screaming. And it's the only one white woman in this entire show that was actually just supposedly Russian, but how could you tell? So, how could you tell, really? We then went on to have this one family that is kind of stuck in this one little kind of little thing that's kind of like goes circle and circle around, that kind of spins around consistently. It's a little kind of I don't know how to explain it. It's some little kind of play thing that kind of just circles around. If you've seen the show, you know what I mean. You know what I mean. Then, we also had this girl that was stuck in this bumper car situation, and so I'm like, okay, you send Hong Chul and Patricia to go get that person. I'm like, Hong Chul had the problem with the forklift from before, so how is this gonna like go horrible with the bumper cars? But hey, just have the guy that consistently is to make mistakes continue to make mistakes anyways. But the stuff with the bumper car situation was bound to happen, so let me go on and just explain that. So we have the bumper car situation where Hong Chul is basically forced by Patricia to just kind of go out there and get this girl, while Patricia is just kind of off to the side, like, hey man, I'm not gonna get bitten, I'm just out here. But eventually she goes on to just kind of be the decoy bumper car character. So Hong Chul goes on to get the girl, and then this sets off every single one of the zombies in the bumper cars, conveniently, by the time that one character gets to this girl, and everything just starts to like set off this whole chain reaction. So now both Hung Chul and both Patricia are now running running around with the chickens with their heads cut off in this bumper car situation. So it gets to where Hung Chul gets the girl and gets out of this car, and then Patricia has to kind of be like a little bit behind them because she was the decoy, and so they save this girl. So now with the whole other situation where Din Din and the young girl go off to try and save this couple, and the doctor goes along with them, the infected doctor. So the DJ is bizarrely like stuck there, and they never save him because they don't care about this DJ. Like, you can go on and just kind of, you're stuck there, so you're fine. So what happens is we find out that this family is at this place, and like Din Din, and they grab them. They grab them. They leave the place that they're at, and they go to some other location. And the girl realizes, well, I have asthma. I need my inhaler. And so the young girl just grabs. No, wait. The infected doctor comes back into play, but the young girl tries to find the doctor as both the infected characters were going on and just kind of having fun around the amusement park, just playing all these rides and whatever, and they weren't doing anything. And then the little girl runs to the doctor and says, "Hey, like this girl has asthma." And so the doctor goes on to run with the girl to find out that she has asthma, as well as the doctor was making some joke about like, well, hey, are we looking for a person named Asthma? So the doctor finds that it's like, well, hey, like there's nothing I can do. Like I'm a doctor, I can't do anything with asthma. So they have to find the inhaler. They go back to the place that they were originally at, and they're stumbling around as this machine starts to come alive as all the zombies start to arrive also. So we eventually find the inhaler into the dead body, and after all these zombies are just kind of being tossed around, as well as the other characters, we find that like all of the characters run off and they're saved. The DJ is still like, "Hey, save me and save me," and no one cares. Sadly enough, the big mission is kind of done here. So now we have to go on and have Dex and Young go to save the girl and the merry-go-round, Ferris wheel, whatever goofy thing that it's called. So the thing with the horses, whatever that goofy, I never knew what that ride was. Finally, I figured out what to call any of these things. So we then go on to, and we have also like the tilt-a-whirl thing that I think ends up being the last thing that they go to, the kind of the observation kind of ride that they eventually go on to by the end there, which you see in the very beginning of the show, and it tells you who is going to win by the end of the show. It ruins kind of the ending of it. So we have where the girl is stuck between a couple of zombies and the thing is circling around consistently. And here's where the potato gun comes in. Neither the nets nor the other items that they had when they were doing the whole kind of zombie German suplex bear hug things, like none of those came to play, but the one potato gun thing did. So The one girl who is best at shooting is conveniently at this one spot where they need to shoot these zombies in the head, and all the while, consistently they keep missing and almost hitting the girl. And so at some point, I'm just like, this is such a waste of time. You're shooting so many potatoes, and why not just grab the girl and you're safe? So we have the zombies being shot, and so it's like, okay, let's grab the girl. And so we find out that this Russian girl is with this guy that she was dating. And so they meet and they hug, and this is all great and wonderful. And here's the thing that bugs the crap out of me. So all these people go on to save these randos, and the randos don't join with the party. The randos run off, and you never see them again. So in my brain, I'm like, why wouldn't these people stay together as a group? And instead, they just kind of run off. So I'm like, why would I have taken the time to save these people if they're just going to run off anyways and eventually just get killed or die or whatever? And I took all of that effort to save all those people. What a waste. So all the people are now saved. They go to the Tilt-A-Whirl because they realize that they have another 5 hours to kill to wait on another boat to come. I'm like, man, this is really dragging this show out. So we go to the Tilt-A-Whirl, supposedly the big observation ride thing that just goes around in a circle to where you can see everything. It's the biggest thing that is to be in this amusement park, of course. And so we also had the infected characters bring all of the zombies into one ride, and I thought that was kind of the funniest thing, and also the most strategically smart thing that these people have ever done in this entire show. Really, that is the most strategic thing that these people could have thought of in the entire show. So we then go on to have the Tilt-A-Whirl moment where everybody's starting to get in uh, one of these little kind of pods to eventually get kind of just swung around in this Tilt-A-Whirl. The funny thing of it is, when we start off in all of these pods, we have all these characters go in 2 by 2 by 2 by 2. And then we also had them talk to this staff guy who was controlling this Tilt-A-Whirl. And he goes on to like give them walkie-talkies and tells them, hey, yeah, I'll just stay down here. I'm like, dude, I don't trust that staff guy whatsoever because he's just the staff guy. He's an extra. I'm not going to trust that he's going to be there for the next 5 hours and not get killed or infected and whatever. So we come to find out that when you get into these pods, you can't get out of them. It's not that easy. And I'm like, I'm sorry, if this is real, like, I would figure out a way. I would break any of the glass that's in there. I could figure out a way to break that door. You can't just have that just be a thing that, like, a person would not figure out a strategy to get out of that location. It doesn't work that way in a realistic scenario. So here's the thing that starts to get really upsetting for me once we get further into the show. So we come to find out that the infected characters have made their way into the place to stop and open the doors for all of these people. And eventually we start to see that the infected people are starting to turn into zombies. And we start to find out that they're starting to get more like upset with the other characters. They're like, well, hey, should we save you? Because like we're probably not going to be able to go with you because we're eventually turning into zombies. So we start to play out with the fact that maybe not all these characters will get saved. And so this thing goes round and round and round, and eventually when the zombies start to not be able to see in front of them, they have to guess who is in what tilt-a-whirl pod. So eventually what happens is that Nana or whatever the injured girl's name was, eventually when we're done with her complaining about how single she is or whatever other garbage that she has to complain about, how she's going to die soon, blah 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 blah, it's annoying, it really is. We come to find out that they have to go on and pick one of the people in the tilt-a-whirl to either kill or save. So we have the injured girl go on and eventually find out that Hong Chul is in one of the tilt-a-whirl pods, and she picks him to eventually get infected and become a zombie, and then the rest of the characters are to have their doors be opened by the doctor, and he says like, oh hey, you guys, like, get out there, like, you're safe, and so they hug one another. I'm like, oh, this is a nice tender moment. So we now find that the doctor ends up turning, and everybody else who wasn't saved by the doctor eventually turns or becomes a zombie and whatever. So we now go on to have all the people that survive have to make their way to the boat. So the thing about the boat is the boat kind of makes most of the way to the shore, but not all the way there. So they have to come up with a strategy about how to get their way to the boat. So they come up with all of these kind of floating devices, and they start to use this like rope system, because one person goes on and kind of has this thing of rope, and he tosses it, and it conveniently gets onto the boat in an edited fashion. I'm like, yeah, convenient. So we have one character that makes his way via this rope to the boat, and then everybody else kind of slogs their way there with these floating devices. So eventually we get to where Patricia is supposed to make her way to the boat, and she is taking forever to get on this boat. And I'm just like, drop her freaking off to the side. She's dead. Throw her into the water. Like, she'd be way better off. So, because she's taking too much time. And zombies are coming up to this fence. I'm like, if you can't get on this boat, then you're going to die. That should be the realization. That should be like, hey, if you're not getting on this boat, you're going to die. So hurry up on this boat, or you're going to die. So Patricia is taking a million years to get on this boat. She can't get on this boat whatsoever. Probably on purpose for story reasons. So Din Din and the younger girl ends up getting on the boat, and that's it. Dex, Young, and Patricia end up getting stuck on this flotation device because the captain ends up waking up. It's like, hey, what are you guys doing? And he leaves. And so Dex ends up taking the floating device and like swimming our people back to shore, to end up having us come to find out that there is another way for these people to have been saved regardless. That eventually we find out that Din Din and the girl who were saying, hey, we'll come back with you, we'll come back for you, were only just thinking of themselves, and it's like, well, hey, we're not going to really talk to this captain all that well, we're just going to get on this boat and we're going to survive, oh well, to any of these people. So eventually we find out that Din Din and the girl that were on this boat start to slowly realize that maybe the reporter that was telling them about the boat, maybe like this was the wrong boat that they were on. And they slowly start to realize that, oh my God, like this isn't right. Maybe we aren't going to survive this. And uh, like they're on this tuna ship. So Dex, Young, and Patricia eventually realize that there's all of a sudden this bus that comes flying and hits this fence, this gate that all these zombies are around. And so the bus driver is like, "Hey, uh, get on the bus, like get on, hurry up." So we come to find that the characters are making on this boat, and they're like, "Okay, they're gonna survive too. This is great. Thumbs up. Uh, Wonderful." So we all of a sudden have me immediately realize as this boat is coming, or this bus is coming by, I'm like, this bus is going to be a multi-purpose vehicle, and it's going to be able to float in the water, and it's going to be a boat also. And whamadine, that's what happens. Like, wow, like how convenient again. So we find out that they're just kind of going on this boat and this multi-purpose vehicle, and that's how they survive. And they're all kind of second guessing about the whole reporter thing and the whole boat thing, and that's where we kind of end the show. But then we have this like goofy 1 year later thing where we find out that Hung Chul is bizarrely uh, going and feeding random things of meat to all these zombies, and he's dancing around, and that's how the show ends. I'm like, that was stupid. So I don't know, like the show was fun, but then again, like it was like there was problems with it. But definitely thumbs up. I'm gonna get out of here because I know this is way too long for a review anyways. Bye everybody. Bye everybody.